Hey guys, section 3.1. This is the age of exploration. I'm out here in the hot boiling garage, likely melting as this podcast occurs. So it's been nice knowing you. But let's do a little exploring. Why the exploration this age occurred, motivations for it, science and technology of exploration, what allowed it to happen, the North American empires that developed, also the effects of exploration. So in our menu, what we've got to look at is why these countries wanted to explore, the advances that helped them conquer Native American civilizations, the growth and purpose of European empires, particularly in Spain, and then short-term and long-term effects of the Columbian Exchange. So that's kind of the general sense of where we're going. I know all of you have in the past have done Columbus and Cortez and all those explorers. It's not necessarily for us important to know like what each explorer did. What we want to focus on is kind of the bigger picture, why exploration happened and what effects caused and happened from there. We've got a map here in the middle, medieval period, late medieval period, early Renaissance, 1478, trade routes from the east to the west. In the west, we are considering Europe. And as you can see, most trade routes that come from the Middle East, that come in from that direction, and certainly far off in Asia here, come through Italy. So what you've got is a situation where any country, any merchant from a country, say Spain, France, the Netherlands, Portugal, if they're going to have access to Asian spices, Middle Eastern goods, whatever, they have to go to Italy. And what Italian merchants can do is say, hey, you can come trade here, but guess what? You're going to have to pay a fee to even be in the neighborhood, to even take goods. So you got to buy the goods and you got to pay us, the Italians, for being here. So if I'm Spain, Portugal, France, English, whatever, I'm thinking if I could find a way to get around the Italians, then hey, I'm cooking with gas and I've got less overhead in terms of trade, and I can bring all these goods back into my area. And notice we've got a lot of trading here in Northern Europe, but again, a lot of those goods, as you see, come from these Italian merchants. So what you've got now is decisions to be made. And what the Portuguese do is say, you know what, we're going to try to go a different way to get over here to what we call the East Indies. And also China and Japan to a lesser extent the Middle East. What if we decide, the Portuguese, what if we decide to go south and try to hug the coast of Africa, and eventually we'll go under Africa and then over through the Indian Ocean? And that's what Portugal does. So you can barely see the word Portugal there, but the Portuguese go south. Now, the Portuguese, as they go from, coastline to coastline, they're going to establish beachhead ports. They're not going to seek to conquer all this area in central continental Africa, but they're going to basically create what's known today mostly interstate stops. When you go down an interstate, you know there's little stops 5 miles, 10 miles apart. That's kind of what the Portuguese do on the coastal areas in Iraq. Not Iraq, I don't know, say Iraq, Africa. That's totally the other thing. So the Portuguese do that. Now we've got the Spanish. The Spanish are also looking to expand their exploration game, and they have a dual monarchy. Ferdinand and Isabella, our old friends, are going to decide to take a chance on a guy named Christopher Columbus. And Columbus says, listen, instead of going south around Africa, instead of going the overland routes, why don't we try going west, and then eventually we'll hang out and be back here in Japan. And of course, jokes on Christopher Columbus because we know what he runs into. So the idea is, why do you explore? It looks like I might not have animations here on this slide, so I'll just go through these point by point. Why explore? Well, there is an old, certainly, let me see here. Can I do a little pin action? In middle school, maybe even earlier, you might have run into this. It's called the 3 G's. Okay, the 3 G's. Gold, God, and, can I do this? Yes, I can. I'm writing with my finger right now. Yes, you're impressed. Glory. So, a lot of people say, hey, that's motivations for exploration, but that's a 4th grade answer. We can do better than that. European states are seeking access to gold, spices, luxury goods as a means to enhance wealth. You're looking for things like cinnamon. Bring cinnamon back from the Far East, makes your food taste better. You ever had Toast Crunch cereal? Yeah, that's right, because it sucks. It's awful. You want Cinnamon Toast Crunch. and it makes foods better. So these merchants are willing to pay a high dollar for this so that they can come back to Europe and sell it for a lot of cash. So you've got that going on. Countries also want to create colonies. Once they find out there are goods in different places, they want to harvest those goods. And to harvest them, you build colonies without having to trade for those goods. So if you create everything yourself, you do not have to buy anything from anyone else. And we'll get through and talk about what that is, mercantilism, here soon. And also the religious motivations. In different contexts, certainly you have Christianity as a buffer to the Ottoman Empire and Islam. You have religion used as a justification to subjugate indigenous cultures. I don't know, the counter. Well, yeah, that's what I mean, is that, hey, if you're going to take over, and we certainly know the story of Columbus, we'll talk about that, the subjugation, the oppression of people, sometimes that would be justified as saying, hey, we want just to spread religion to them and enlighten them, so to speak. Also, religious freedom for Protestant minorities, the Shakers and the Quakers and all these minority groups that come to the New World to escape persecution. The Puritans, for goodness sakes, are a good example of that. So that's why we explore. Now, what helps Europe conquer? So we've explored, we're doing that as exploration starts. What helps Europe to conquer other lands? Well, first of all, you got to know where you're going, and that is where the compass comes in, the scientific tool that tells us, hey, we can go north, south, east, and west. We can figure out our direction. We have what's called the caravel, C-A-R-A-V-E-L. Think Pirates of the Caribbean and the Black Pearl. It's a ship that can sail into the wind. So the old ships, the wind blows against you, you're done, maybe even sunk. But now with these caravels, they can be the sails can be manipulated to sail into the wind and stay on course. You have gunpowder, something that can allow you to, if there's a fight, to destroy your adversaries. And these Native American civilizations certainly did not have a chance. And an unwilling participant in this adventure, and we will look at this later, but this is smallpox, biological warfare, and the Europeans will bring diseases over that Native Americans have not seen before and will die in huge numbers due to that. But perhaps the one thing that is underrated and you don't see at all that Europe has that helps them conquer is a quick transportation mode. Not the ship, but the horse. The horsies. Okay, they get on their American pharaohs and look out. Europeans can move from place to place easily. The horse, of course, is native to Spain. And using the horses, they are able to control and navigate areas quickly, especially in Central and South America. So Columbus does sail the ocean blue in 1492, and shortly after that, this is the event that really kicks off this sense of rivalry in the New World. It's called the Treaty of Tordesillas. Remember, our two countries that started this exploration game were Spain and, if you said Portugal, you are correct. So this treaty in 1494, again, very early, is going to settle colonial claims, basically saying, and the Pope is moderating this and deciding the terms of the treaty, it splits the world in two, saying that everything on the east side of this line is going to be Portugal's, but everything discovered on the west of this line will be claimed by Spain. Now, of course, the ironic part of this is at this point, 1494, we have no idea that all of this stuff is here. So Spain takes a flyer on it. Portugal can control their African ports, but guess what? In the end, they're going to lose out because the Spanish have access, at least in the Catholic world, to all of these other territories. Now, Columbus himself. And we're going to talk more about this in class, and maybe this is something to skip in your notes entirely, but the story of Columbus is certainly a complicated one. Yes, perhaps honored for his achievements, if not undeserved for the discovery of the New World, but certainly his treatment of the indigenous people, the Taino people on the island of Hispaniola in Bahamas, is certainly something to note. And in fact, it was a Spanish priest named Bartholomew de las Casas who began to note that the treatment of Native Americans was certainly not something to be appreciated. And he wrote about what was called the Black Legend, in which he saw that across the New World that the Spanish were, yes, using religion as justification for conquering, but at the same time, they were using it in certainly violent means to take over and enslave. So he condemns, De las Casas condemns the treatment of Columbus's treatment, rather, of the native peoples. But in the New World, Spain continued to grow. And I'm sorry, I'm in here, my hair is getting all crazy. It's just getting sweaty out here. Okay. Almost there. So Spain in the New World. I'm just imagining I'm in New Mexico right now because it's really hot. So again, Spain looking to build colonies by conquering regions. They set up what's called the encomienda. And what that was basically a stratified social ladder and pyramid, much the same way that unofficially was presented in the medieval world in Europe. You could call this part-time slavery, because what would happen is that the people that the Spanish would enslave, they could go to their homes for half of the week. The other half, they would work on things that the Spanish would want them to do. And certainly their ability to harness labor sources in the New World restricted the use of African slaves in Spanish colonies. Now, you're going to see, of course, that come in other colonies, particularly in the French and English colonies. But in Spain, this encomienda was an efficient use of slave labor. It's horrible for me to talk about it in these biting terms, but in any case, the Spanish were able to set it up. So what you had here is you had the labor down here, and then you had classes. Peninsulares were groups of people who were Spanish by birth. Creoles were of Spanish parents, but born in the New World. And the mestizos and mulattoes were half Spanish and born from either a Hispanic or African parent. So not necessarily, you don't need to know like the definitions of each, but know this encomienda was built as a way to structure labor for the Spanish in the New World. So again, the plan was, even how it was sold, is that it would be a way for the Spanish settlers to either Christianize or take care of the Native Americans that they had conquered, but the reality is what you see below, and it was De las Casas who wrote against these atrocities. Now, as the world developed, you can kind of take a look here and maybe characterize for yourself who goes where. The English sticking to the coast and up to Canada, New Spain everywhere, Portugal down what will become Brazil. The French have a large piece of land as well here in the central United States, or future United States, that would eventually become the Louisiana Purchase. So the big thing to know is Spain is in Central and South America, Britain and France mostly in Northern America, and the Dutch, if you notice, are creating, that's the purple here, the Netherlands. They're creating areas really all around the world to help develop a trading empire. So that's here's kind of a summary of that, where these countries are going. Just kind of have a sense of where they are. I'm not going to have to fill in a map or anything, but know and think about like these places where they are controlling the, I guess, the legacy of their culture still today. For example, Brazil is, they speak Portuguese in Brazil. Of course, the Spanish culture is still very prevalent in Central and South America. All right, so why does all this stuff matter? Why does this exploration business matter? Turn this pen off. The laser highlighter. I don't want a laser pointer. Can I just get a finger? Ooh, that's pretty. Okay, we'll go with that. So, what is the effect? Well, when exploration happens, coming out of that is the transition and implementation of goods from place to place, the movement of them. And we call this the Columbian Exchange. And from one place to another, you have goods going back and forth. Now, if we had to take a selling point here on this, two things to note. One, going from North America to Europe are staple crops: corn, potatoes. When corn and potatoes are introduced to Europe, it is a game changer for the European diet. It increases the nutrition value with staple goods that are easy to grow, and that helps the diet of Europeans. Another thing, though, that goes to the New World, of course, we've talked about horses already, but let's talk about the death and disease, smallpox. And again, as mentioned before, smallpox has devastating effects on Native American civilizations. In fact, 25 million people living in Mexico before the Spanish arrived. Some reports say as many as 24 million die as a result of the smallpox. And from that system of trade, we have developed what you know or should know already and been introduced, the system of triangular trade. And again, what the European civilizations want, who have superior technology at this time, is to find an economic advantage. And what they do is they take these goods which are coming back, they take the goods that are coming to them from the Far East, and they set up basically a trade network to maximize their money. And because of that, the economic, and this is important, the economic power in Europe moves to the Atlantic states away from the Mediterranean. So instead of Italy, remember pre-Renaissance, how they had the ports and the merchants and they're growing and selling art, whatever. Now that money is shifting to the Atlantic states. France, the Netherlands, England, and Spain. Those are your primary players that start to bring in money. And of course, the dark side of this triangular trade is what is called the Middle Passage. And that advents and increases the slave trade. We mentioned how the Spanish were able to control Native American populations through the encomienda. The French and the British were not as efficient and had to resort to the creation of the African slave trade. A story, certainly one of great human sorrow and disaster, to put it extremely lightly. In that case, we'll mention and go through and talk more, certainly of a story you've heard before, but our goal, as we look at the big picture, is to put this in the economic context and unfortunately go through the story of how human beings were used as economic tools to create wealth for European empires. So, a story that's not great and not fun to tell. Do I want to keep them? No, let's get rid of them. In any case, it's something that we will finish and discuss the story going forward. Exploration. Know why it happened, know how it occurred, or how it was a successful, and kind of how it developed, and also the effects, something we will talk much more about in Section 2 of Unit 3. See ya.